we're going to start with something that we talked about a little bit on the last episode, which we knew nothing about, which was the mystery chip in fantasy Premier League. We didn't know what it was. It was teased to us about we should be expecting something for the mystery chip. And the mystery chip has been unveiled. So we're going to break it down here. Marco, I'm going to allow you to kind of give a breakdown of what the FPL mystery chip is all about. And actually, we're going to talk about how we intend to take advantage of that for the FPL as well.
All right, so the FPL Mystery Chip. I'm actually excited about this one because it's going to make things a little bit more interesting this season. So, the assistant manager chip, you earn points from a manager, any manager from the 20 teams, in addition to your players. Each manager is budgeted from a price between 0.5 million to 1.5 million. And the chip will be available from game week 24 this January and can be played at any point towards to the end of the season. Now, when you activate the chip, your assistant manager will score points for you based on their club results, and you have that for 3 weeks, 3 game weeks in a row. Now, some things to remember: once the chip is activated, you cannot use any other chip for any of those 3 weeks when it's activated, but you can transfer the manager you're using between each of the 3 game weeks. If a manager leaves the club during one of those 3 game weeks, the score you get would be based on what the original club does. And so you get 6 points for a team win, 3 points for a draw, and for any goal the team scores, it's 1 point per goal. And then for any clean sheets, you now have 2 points. Now, another piece that makes things a little bit more interesting is that if your the manager you choose, faces a club that's ranked at least 5 places higher than them on the Premier League table at the time of the game week, you get an additional number of bonus points. I believe it's 6 points. So it's actually very interesting because if you think about it, the team wins, maybe they score 3 goals. That's like 9 points. A clean sheet, 11 points. You add the bonus points, you could end up going away with 16 points from one game week. You do it well over the 3 game weeks. That could be like maybe 30, 40, 50 points. Um, could be the difference between you winning your mini league.
Oh yeah, yes. I think that is going to be interesting how we kind of deploy this chip. Just to add to what you were saying, because I think one thing there, I think a lot of the assistant manager thing is um, more straightforward in the sense that yes, you pick a manager. So for example, it's Pep Guardiola or it's Ruben Amorim or Mikel Arteta, right? And when his team, for example, Pep Guardiola, Man City, plays a team 3 consecutive weeks, you now get points for the team winning, a draw, the goals scored by the team, and the clean sheet over that three-cost team. So that's kind of more clear. I think a win there is 6 points, draw 3, goals scored by team 1 per goal, clean sheet 2. But the interesting part is the little asterisks of the table draw that you talked about. Now that's big because if the team now you don't want to pick Man City, right? But well, Man City might be a good option considering where they are at the table. But if you pick a team 5 points or 5 league places above you, if you draw against that team, you get 5 extra bonus, and if you win them, 10 extra. So if you win all 3, that's 30 extra points for this chip in 3 consecutive weeks. So that's going to be interesting. I think you just did a full breakdown of it. I don't know if there's any other things. You mentioned most of the details on there, like you can't use any other chip when you're actually using it. So the next thing I want to talk about with you, Malcolm, is when you saw this mystery chip unveiled. What are you thinking in terms of how you're thinking about deploying these chips and using them in the coming weeks in FPL?
It makes things interesting because, so if you think about how it's scored, it incentivizes you in a sense to use the manager chip in a double game week. Um, because if you your team can get more points, right? They're in the same game week, they're having more fixtures, so they can get more points. But ideally, you also want to use your triple captain, you want to use your bench boost, you also want to use um, what's the other chip?
Free hits.
Your free hits um, as well. And the assistant manager key chip, once you use it, you can use it for those 3 game weeks, for 3 game weeks. So it kind of hamstrings you in a bit. So you actually have to be very strategic the way you deploy it. I think it's definitely going to be an interesting one for the dedicated players because it's going to be a way that you can actually pass either of the casual players because you notice that once that chip becomes available, people are going to start using it, but then they realize it could hamstring you a little bit if there's double game weeks upcoming. For people who have all their chips left, I think once the doubles and blanks are announced, is something that we actually need to actually sit down and pay close attention to on how what we want to handle it. I'm thinking like, do I want to use this on a top manager? Like, do you want to use it on any slots? Okay, you could get more wins, but you don't have any chance of getting any of those bonus points. That's interesting. Do you want to use it on a team that's underperforming? Manchester United, for example, they could be like at the bottom half of the table. They could run into good form. They could be playing one of the teams in the top half. Personally, I'm going to be paying close attention to whoever is playing against Nottingham Forest to see because right now they're third. But if you think about a team like Brighton, for example, or Aston Villa, they could be 5 places behind them, or even depending on how things go with Newcastle. I know right now they're almost in the top four, but
Yeah,
there's
their fifth
a
position.
fifth position, right? There's a situation where they could be like eighth position um, when they have to play Nottingham Forest. So there's some options, but you also look at right now, FPL has released the pricing for all the managers. You
Mm.
have Arne Slot, Pep Guardiola, Arteta, Eddie Howe, and I believe one more Pep. I mentioned Pep. One more manager I'm missing. That's 1.5 million. But they also take a lot from your actual budget schedule. So I think it'll be very interesting once these fixtures come out, especially the next double game week for Liverpool. Because personally, I think it's going to be a no-brainer this year to triple captain Salah, so that would really help me and help us to make see what's the best strategy in terms of moving and attacking it.
Mm. Okay, so yeah. As you mentioned something about the prices being out, I wasn't fully aware of that. I know the pricing is going to be from 0.5 to 1.5, and we expect the top managers to be at the top end, right,
Yes,
of the
yes,
pricing, and then teams that are struggling to be at the bottom end of that pricing. But also, as you mentioned, that allowed me to actually think to let people know about other things they want to know. Because the first time you add a manager, right, it doesn't count as a transfer. But if you do replace that manager, um, because there was an understanding that it could be you have to use one manager all 3 weeks consecutively, but you can actually change the team and the manager, but this would now count as a transfer in the subsequent weeks unless you leave the same manager. So that's actually an important strategy thing you can do. So you can pick and slot week one, change and slot, bring in Ruben Amorim, take out Ruben Amorim, bring in Eddie Howe for the third week. But the subsequent 2 weeks, if you make any changes, that would count as a transfer for that. For those weeks, the first week doesn't count as a transfer. And also, most importantly, let's say you mentioned that Pep Guardiola and the top managers would cost 1.5 pounds, basically, or however you want to, or points, fantasy points, right, to actually acquire. That means you have to, in your transfer, keep 1.5 free, right? You have to keep 1.5 free to be able to bring in this manager. Because if you're using up all of your budget for 100, that means you don't have any extra money to bring in Pep Guardiola or any of the managers that you want to use for the transfer. So you want to keep,
Exactly.
yeah, so you want to keep 1.5 freed up, or you would need to free up 1.5 from your team somehow by making moves to actually bring in these managers. But if you play FPL or fantasy, you don't want to miss out on an opportunity to get these bonus points. Forget, leave it to the last weeks or whatever. There's a lot of chips that needs to be used, so you want to have a plan for what to do with the basically the assistant manager chip and the mystery chip. Yeah, when you were saying that, it was important to mention that 1.5, that when you
Yes.
put it
Yes.
in, you
Yes.
actually have to have that budget. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I,
The other
yeah, go
piece of
ahead.
that, the other piece of that is that if you start with a manager that's less than one, that you can start with managers as less than 1.5. So right now, for example, I see Ruben Amorim is 0.8 million. Also want to keep that in mind because you would have to make up additional budgets during the 3 weeks. Maybe if you want to switch Amarim for Ateta or Slot or Eddie Howe, you have to make sure like that additional budget is in your team. So maybe it might be okay to start with the 1.5 million manager, and then just keep in mind if they're depending on how the fixtures are, you can only downgrade. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
that makes it easier, right? If you actually, that's what, if you save up 1.5, now whether you get a manager that's more expensive or the one that's cheaper, you have enough money to make those switches. The good thing with, maybe now we have an idea why they changed the transfer laws and give us more transfers to be able to make these changes. This would have been very tough with two transfers
yes,
max. Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. But to be honest, I don't know about you. The way this season has gone, keeping multiple transfers and helping them roll over, it's been difficult.
Oh,
But
really? I've almost been
it's
able to keep three transfers usually, up to three, and
but you're
not
right.
make too many changes. Well, that's the thing, right? I
Yeah,
stuck around with some bad players too long. That's
that's the
what
thing.
happens.
So I have a player. I kept Eberechi Eze for the
Yeah.
big longest part of the start of the season, and he just kept blanking. And I think I was on the Haaland train too long too.
Yeah,
So
I was definitely on the Haaland train for too long. Should have got
yeah,
off that bus real quickly.
yeah. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting how this all plays out. I think the fact that you can't use a second chip is going to really make it really catch a lot of managers by surprise this season. I think.
Yeah, that would be interesting because you said something about the fact that the optimal or the ideal time to use it would be in a double game week. But if you've played Fantasy Premier League for a while, you would know double game weeks are usually reserved for bench boosts and triple captain chips.
Yeah,
So that means something has to be done differently this year. So it will be interesting
yeah.
to see how that is navigated. So going back to the strategy we're talking about, so putting you on the spot a little bit, what would be your favorite strategy on a general scale? Would you be going for a team a little bit down the table, let's say eight or below, so that you can get some possible bonuses by winning a team five places higher in the table, or you think it will be probably a better decision to pick a team on the top, like a pretty good team like Liverpool, Arsenal, or Manchester City, Newcastle, where there's a better chance that they get more goals scored, a higher chance for clean sheets, and also a higher chance for wins. Is that a risk you want to take, or because I'm looking at the table now, there seems to be very good opportunities. If it was to be today, right? You got some teams. Brighton is 10th position. Brighton would have a good chance on the right day to beat Nottingham Forest, maybe have a chance against Newcastle, depending on the situation. You have Tottenham and Manchester United right now, 12 and 13. Some people would say there's a chance there against Bournemouth at 7. Nottingham Forest maybe at 3. Maybe you get one of the Newcastle, Chelsea at home. There could be a chance there. And you go down the table a little bit, and West Ham could have an opportunity, Crystal Palace, against teams like Fulham, Bournemouth. Like, do you think that it's something you'll be looking at on a week to week? Because we can change managers, right? So are you looking at it on a week to week basis, or you're trying to target one team going up against higher teams.
Yeah. I personally like to target one team going up against other teams, but in practice, it might not really work that way. In essence, what I'm where I'm leaning towards right now is that I'll be looking at a lot of the underperforming big teams.
Mm,
So looking at the table right now with Tottenham at 12 and Man United at the 13, those are teams that I'll be paying close attention, especially Ruben Amorim with his price at 0.8 million seems quite affordable, and it looks like they're changing. They beat Arsenal today, so it looks like there's going to be an increase in their form. But it's all there's always going to be something to be said about using one of the big boys. Like there's like it's always good when you have a manager you can just keep it and set and forget. So Liverpool, Liverpool right now they're gonna have they have a game that's going to be rescheduled, and it looks like right now they may have a double game week in 24 or 25. So it could be a situation where I start with Liverpool. Um, in that double game week and then switch to another manager afterwards. Um, but I think right now we need to see what that schedule would look like. I'm gonna personally be targeting Nottingham Forest quite a bit. The people who play Nottingham Forest, because like when I look at it, if you want to roll the dice, I look at Aston Villa, I look at Fulham, I look at Brentford, Brighton, Tottenham, even West Ham on a good day. If Bowen is playing well, really anything can happen, right? Anything can happen. And if Manchester City's form does not pick up, right now Man City is sixth, but you have they're at 34 points. You have Bournemouth at 33, Aston Villa at 32, Fulham at 33. You could have a situation where they lose their next game, which their next game is against Arsenal. So you can have a situation where they have Arsenal, Newcastle, and Liverpool in the next. Arsenal, Newcastle, Liverpool, and Tottenham the next four. So by game week 27, you could have a situation where Manchester City is at eighth or ninth position. If that happens, I'm looking at Pep Guardiola quite a bit. So there's a couple questions that need to be answered, but there's a lot of good options right now, the way I see it.
Oh yeah, I think that would be an interesting thing to play along and see how that plays out. Because while you were just speaking, I was just thinking about it. If Liverpool is playing, for example, Southampton, Everton, or Leicester City, and they get a double game week with one of those teams, I don't even want those home wins. I want the 5 goals scored, possible clean sheets,
Right.
almost the guaranteed 2 wins. There are ways you can rack up really good points
Really
if
good
the
point.
scenario actually fits right, and then you get this stretch and you get like maybe a Brentford at home versus a Nottingham Forest. That might be a great sport to maybe target Brentford, Brighton, Tottenham, something like that against a team like Nottingham Forest. Especially some factors, maybe those teams are at home and not playing away from home at the Forest ground. So that would be an interesting thing to actually play out in terms of the mystery chip.